You asked for another part of the guide on diagnosing and monitoring computer components. Here it is. Since this is just the second episode, we won't cover complex topics yet. Instead, we'll focus on something light and enjoyable that I hope you'll like. I'll show you how to modify and customize the dull-looking parameters collected by Afterburner so that they finally look much better and are easier to read. I'll also show you how to save these profiles and copy them to another computer, and to make it even better, I'll share this specific preset for you to download. Besides, you'll also be able to get some more advanced statistics from me. This is Pavel, and you're watching the TechManiac HD channel. Welcome. Since we finished the first episode on the monitoring tab, that's where we'll start as well. I asked you then to go through and check all the available metrics. Clicking the check mark next to one doesn't mean it will appear on the screen overlay yet. It will only appear after selecting the Show on-screen display option and applying the settings. I also showed you how to make a simple change to the metric's name. As you can see on my screen, I've already changed the names. For example, Central Processing Unit usage was originally labeled as Central Processing Unit by default, and it didn't look very good because it grouped all the parameters into one line. If you want to separate these parameters, simply replacing the group name like this will nicely split them up. However, today we're going to take it a step further and do a deeper customization. In the load field, you can enter the name of your specific processor. Just remember that if you transfer the overlay to another device, the name will require manual correction again, which can be a hassle, but you just need to enter Central Processing Unit % here and click Apply. See how cool that is? Afterburner will automatically read the processor name and apply it here. If you now transfer the overlay to another computer, this function will also automatically read and apply the correct name. Great, but as always there's a catch. Well, in the version you'll download from me, this spot will show Central Processing Unit usage because some unit names are too long, which makes the whole overlay wider. That's the case with my laptop, which has a Ryzen processor and integrated graphics. That's why it's worth trying out this feature on your own machines. Maybe it'll be just right. And if not, you should probably stick with what I entered. You can change the name of the graphics card just as easily. In my preset, I labeled this metric as graphics usage, because that way everyone knows what it's about. If you want the full name of the chip to be displayed here, you just change this field to GPU %, and instead, the beautiful name of the card will be shown. But here we run into the same problem. If the name of the card is going to be ridiculously long or ugly, it's better to label this field in some other way. You could also consider adding the current version of the graphics driver here. Just add driver in quotation marks, making sure the first letter is capitalized, and now that information will also appear. This can be very useful. As you can see, in my version of the overlay, I've made spaces between the processor group, RAM, graphics card, and so on. We should first move the metrics with the mouse on the list to the places where we want them to be, but the spaces themselves are made in a completely different way. So, to have the graphics card group separated, I add a backslash and a lowercase n in the metric name. This code is the equivalent of pressing the Enter key. That's why, moving on to the RAM field now, you probably won't be surprised that I have the name written this way. The backslash with n creates a space by leaving an extra empty line. Next, occupied from, so we know what it's about, %RAM %, so it automatically reads the currently installed amount of RAM in the computer. Finally, we write RAM in words to clarify it's about this computer, not the disk or VRAM. Of course, I'm not forcing anything on you here. You can choose the names and colors according to your own preferences. That's right, I mentioned colors. To do this, click the button with those 3 dots. If you're making changes to the preset you downloaded from me, you'll see that I chose the modern layout here. That is modern layout because it allows for richer customization options. Here we have 6 color groups that you can change as you wish. Basically, you can change everything here to suit your needs, but since describing everything in detail would take us several good hours, I think that's unnecessary. If someone is interested, by trial and error, you'll quickly figure out what to do and how. But alright, here's one example. Alignment 0 expanded from 4 to 5 characters. I'll click apply and I can already see that everything has expanded, creating a gap between the longest line about RAM and the values themselves. It looks nicer, but I still prefer a narrower overlay, so with a few clicks I change it back to how it was. Anyway, like I said, there's no point in covering everything, because whoever wants to can figure it out on their own, and the tips you see on the screen now will definitely help you and make it clear what to do. Of course, you can pause at this point. Let's now move on to downloading the template, although I suspect that some of you like to take shortcuts and have skipped ahead to this part. Well, I completely understand that, but I have to warn you that in this particular case, skipping half of the video will actually make things take longer and cause more difficulties instead of saving you time. If the metric name isn't correct, you'll get unwanted gaps between lines, or something will be too small or too big, and you'll waste a lot of time trying to figure it out. So just like in life, there are no shortcuts here. And the second thing is, if you only watch part of the material, the YouTube algorithm will think it's bad and will bury it. No one will ever find this series again, and there will be no point in making more parts of the tutorials. So seriously, if you like my educational materials and you want the community of computer enthusiasts, which now includes you, to be better informed, to know how to solve problems with stability, optimization, diagnostics, and choosing the right computer components, then by giving a thumbs up, sharing the link to this material, and most importantly, watching it from start to finish, you'll help our whole community. Are we all clear? Now then, let's move on with the topic. As I mentioned at the beginning, I've prepared an overlay for download that's simpler and sufficient for everyone, as well as a more visually advanced one, which in my opinion is more attractive and much more original than what Afterburner offers.
The simpler one will be available for everyone to download for free, and I'll explain everything in detail in just a moment.
On the other hand, the more complex one will only be available for people supporting the channel who have access to our Discord server, which means at least a bronze badge. A new thread with several such overlays has already appeared there. Over time, their number may increase, but what is already ready is a version showing the load of components in a graphical style based on bars. The second version uses circles, referring to car gauges, and is simpler but more elegant. All of this is already on Discord, and if you want to have access to them, I definitely encourage you to support the channel, either through YouTube or on Patronite. I'll also mention that it's cheaper through Patronite, and more actually goes to the creator than through YouTube support.
All the links are in the description, and among them you'll also find 2 configuration files to download the free version.
Why are there 2 versions? Well, depending on your hardware configuration, the dedicated card may be labeled as GPU 0 or as GPU 1. By pressing Ctrl, Shift and Escape together in Windows, you can easily check this. Go to the Performance tab and check which chip is labeled with which number. On my desktop computer, which only has a dedicated graphics card, GPU 0 is the correct one. On the other hand, in a laptop equipped with both an integrated and a dedicated chip, GPU 0 is the one we probably don't want to measure. But number 1 is the more powerful NVIDIA chip, although for you it might be the other way around, so check and download the correct version. Next, close Afterburner and go to the folder labeled Profiles in the installation directory. If you want to keep your settings from the program, and I'm not talking about those 5 profiles, but the other settings, add a word, for example, Moje, to the MSI Afterburner file with the configuration extension. That way, if necessary, you can easily go back to them. Now, move the file you downloaded from me here, restart Afterburner, and launch any program or game in windowed mode. Holding the left control and clicking the start of the square bracket will activate the on-screen overlay. Pressing the close bracket with Control, well, closes the overlay. If you want to activate the benchmark, now hold the left Alt and open the square bracket. Closing it ends the benchmark. No one has ever been born who could please everyone. If you don't like the key bindings, you can change them. You don't know how? That's what episode 1 covers. Time to catch up. Let's fine-tune the overlay now. From the toolbar, open RivaTuner Statistics Server. First, adjust the overlay size to fit your monitor. Clicking the small virtual screen's corners lets you move the pinned statistics. If you want to move them a bit away from the edge, you can grab them with your mouse and adjust them. You can also click through or even manually enter the number of pixels for the offset. On-screen display fill toggles the background, while shadow adds letter shadows. By clicking this last black dot, you can change the color and saturation level of the background. After clicking Raster 3D, you'll have the option to change the font and its size. Once you've perfected everything, you can easily transfer the overlay to another computer. All you need to do is copy the file named msiafterburner.cfg to the same folder on another PC. If you also think it's incredibly easy, you should give it a thumbs up. Everything's great, but it's also vital to include more metrics. For example, M2 SSD temperature metrics, as they often overheat. Or even more importantly, the temperature of VRAM and the GPU hotspot. Memory reaching up to 105 degrees Celsius will eventually damage the card, and I've already made several interesting guides about this. I'll leave the links in the description. On the other hand, too high a hotspot temperature is a common cause of brutal clock drops and sudden ramping up of fans to maximum speeds. That's why it should be monitored as well. However, adding these and other sensors requires another application, which we will cover in the next part of this guide. Maybe it's already out. Check www.techmaniacsd.pl.